today we're closing with Reverend Gloria Hammond White, and I am so excited for this conversation and everything that's going to happen in it. Over the last year, though, just so you know some of the background for how this all happened and why you're here, and maybe you were invited by somebody, or hopefully one of your pastors let you know about it, or you're affiliated with Vision New England in some way. But really the heart behind this has been, over the last year, the steering group has been meeting and dreaming and discussing what could this look like as females. What are some of the gaps that we've noticed? Hey, what's up?
Hi, dear.
Welcome. Welcome. You're in the car? Beautiful. Where are you coming from in the car?
Massachusetts, going to Vermont.
Oh, all right. So you're traveling through New England with the New England women. You're probably driving through some of our churches and towns. Very cool. Wave as you go, you know?
Yes, I think
Except we'll keep both hands on the wheel,
so.
but listen too. Maybe wave once in a while. Well, we met like about a year ago trying to discuss and dream through what this could look like. Thinking through some of the gaps that we've experienced as women in leadership, and there's two that really presented themselves. One, opportunities to really grow yourself as an individual and as a leader, specifically as a woman, and what that could look like. And the second gap that we noticed was in our shared experiences was opportunities to connect with other females who were in similar areas of leadership. And so we kind of wrestled with that for a while and decided, why not just try and tackle both and be a bridge for both in the way that God can enable us and provide for us. So this is how it's kind of developed. And we've done these three discussions so far as a large group, with opportunities to kind of connect and figure out how to lead well as a woman. And then we also have started peer groups, which we're relaunching again coming in the new year, with opportunities for females to connect and hear other stories and get to know and network as a woman. And honestly, personally, as this all started, and when Pastor Victoria reached out and asked if I'd be a part of the steering group, I immediately told her no. Because I didn't feel qualified. And that was kind of that's been part of my journey in this group. And whether this is your first time joining with us or you've been a part of it the whole time, I really hope that this will happen for you too, where you realize that you actually are qualified, and because it's God who calls you. And in my youth, I'm 27. I've been in ministry for 6 years, which feels super long to me, but in comparison to all of the other women that I'm surrounded by in the steering team, no, I have no experience. So to be able to join the ranks and kind of from, my perspective and what I've walked through, I didn't really see the value, honestly. I didn't see the value in connecting with other women. I was more focused on, how do I get a seat at the table with other men who are also youth pastors. In my fellowship, I'm the only female youth pastor, and so my ability to network has been very limited in that scope, and I didn't really see the value in it. But since being with these women and hearing their stories, every single group, and whether that's small or large, and both Carolyn and Sarah, and I'm sure today Reverend Gloria, their stories of what they've done to really push forward so that people like me can come in the next generation and do what I do is incredible. So I'm hoping that today will be a time that we can encourage each other and learn from each other. And thank you all for joining us. And I hope that in small group or in discussion group that you'll have the same opportunity that I've had to really that it will just open your eyes to how powerful women can be when we join together. And so to pass off to Reverend Dana as she introduces our speaker for today.
Thank you so much, Alexa, for that wonderful welcome. And I just loved you sharing so vulnerably about your own story and your engagement with this new initiative through Vision New England. And what we are trying to accomplish through the Women in Christian Leadership Forum. And you have, I mean, I just think it's amazing that you would sort of say that you didn't feel qualified when you have blessed the steering team so much with all of the perspectives and thoughts. And I think, you know, this has certainly been one of the priorities of our steering team, is not only to connect with women all over New England, but also to connect intergenerationally, you know, with different diverse cultures, and just as much as possible to really reflect the full body of Christ among women in Christian leadership. So grateful you joined us and that you have been helping us to shape what this looks like going forward. So today, as Alexa said, it's the third in the series, and I am so excited to introduce to you Reverend Gloria White-Hammond. She and I have known each other for a number of years. I've had many opportunities to be in her church that she co-pastors, Bethel AME in Boston, with her husband, Ray. They are just an amazing couple whom God has used. They navigate both the workplace world as well as being pastors, because they are both medical doctors as well as being reverends. And so but I think more than that, especially in the last year, and the topic today, her title is Leading Boldly in the Midst of a Community in Crisis. And so I have had a chance through some of my work with the Boston Trauma Healing Collaborative and with the Corey Johnson Program for Post-Traumatic Healing to just really see this lived out as she has partnered with Reverend Liz Walker. She co-directs Harvard Medical School and a Harvard Divinity course, Medicine and Spirituality and Healing. And I think even though I've known her for a long time, her work in the Sudan, you know, has been just remarkable. She actually has a ministry called My Sister's Keeper, where she does creative writing mentoring for high-risk adolescent girls, and Shatter the Silence, ministry that addresses sexual victimization in communities of faith. And so this idea of leading boldly in the midst of a community of crisis, this is something that Reverend Gloria has lived out in her own life for years and years and years. And so I too am super excited about hearing what she has to share with us today. So with that, I'm going to invite Reverend Gloria to share with us, and then we will move into a time of Q&A. So feel free to, as you know, even as Reverend Gloria is speaking, to start to drop questions in the chat, and we will then have a chance to come back to that after she's finished with her presentation. So Reverend Gloria, I invite you to speak to us.
Thank you so much. It is a delight to be with you all today. This is the day the Lord has made, and I am so glad to be here with you and to be able to see ourselves together. I want to thank the leadership of the steering committee of Vision New England Women in Christian Leadership for extending this invitation to me 9 months ago, and for staying with me and praying with me over that period of time, especially Dana and Victoria. Thank you so much. And the rest of the leadership team that's on the call, Ashley and Alexa and Annette and Ashley, the 4 A's are in the house. I also want to thank the previous speakers, Sarah Shin, who was so profound. She challenged us to break down the walls of our boxes that are defined by race and by class, by gender, by education, all of the things that fuel the isms, and to break those down and begin to lead with courage. And Carolyn Custis James, who helped us to see that God does divinely call and fully equips women to confidently lead in this mission to rescue a lost world. So I'm hoping that I can build on that. And I want to also just acknowledge that your presence here today, and to thank you for showing up not only today, but over all the yesterdays, especially the last 18 months. As we wandered through this wilderness of crises upon crises upon crises, the COVID and racial reckoning, the political polarization, the economic recession that has already gripped so many of us up close and personal, observing our climate in free fall. And I want to assure you that there is a word from the Lord today. And so last month, Carolyn took us to the character that most, the woman in the Bible that most informs her daily walk and daily work. And today I'm going to take you to the sister who continues to speak to me from day to day. And if you look in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and Esther, we're going to read from chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. And when they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, perhaps you've come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." And then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither drink nor eat for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do. And after that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Ask that you would pray with me this afternoon as we think on the title, Women Leading Boldly in the Midst of a Community in Crisis, or Well-Behaved Women Rarely Make History. You know, historians often discuss watershed events, and those are critical turning points in history that fundamentally change how people think about and do life. Typically, watershed events are only recognized in retrospect because, as the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard noted, though we live life going forward, we only understand life by looking backwards. And the challenge for us as participants in the story is that we can't always perceive what God is doing in the midst of the event. We can have a sense afterwards, but in the moment, when we're experiencing the event, we're constrained in our understanding and honestly often frightened by the implications of what we can see immediately in front of us. In this text, we encounter Esther. Esther is in the midst of a watershed moment. You certainly know the story of Esther, that she had recently been chosen through a contest as the wife to the king. And unbeknownst to the king, Esther was Jewish. So when the Jews were threatened with genocide, Esther's relative Mordecai, who had raised her, asked her to intervene with the king on behalf of her fellow Jews. And Esther responds by reminding Mordecai of something that Mordecai obviously already knew. And that is, to go before the king without an invitation was to risk immediate death, implying that she was uninclined to run that risk. And Mordecai lovingly but clearly reminds her of the words from Proverbs 24, verse 11 through 12, that our responsibility is to rescue those being led away to death, hold back those staggering towards slaughter. And then he says, and then the text says in Proverbs 24, the wise person says, But if you say, we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he, God, who guards your life, know it? Will God not repay according to what you have done? And I want to kind of look at a couple of points in the story this far. So first of all, it's important to appreciate that God does literally intend to save his people in the midst of a crisis. And that's not just spiritually. It's not just about getting people saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost. And as we'd say in my tradition, speaking in tongues as the Spirit of God giveth utterance. It's about meeting people, saving people physically and emotionally, and literally saving them from the doom that awaits them. And the only question then is whether Esther will be counted among the righteous ones who advocated on their behalf. Every woman in leadership needs a Mordecai. That's a point. We all need a Mordecai, but recognize that that's not a gendered role, but it's someone who hears God and knows us, someone who will help us discern our calling, is invested in our fulfilling our calling, and will call us on our stuff when we don't rise to the occasion. And so Mordecai said to Esther, when Esther said, I'm not feeling this coming before the king. For if you keep silent at such a time as this, God is going to send help. God intends to rescue the Jews. God intends to rescue people from the complexities of their life, and it will come from another quarter. But here's the thing, you will suffer, and not only you and your people and your people's people will also suffer. So it not only has implications for me to fail to do the thing that God has called me to do, even when it's difficult, will have implications for people I love. And who knows, but that you've come to this position, you've come to this place of having your needs met for such a time as this. So a couple of points. God does intend to save his people, and we're not just talking about spiritually, we're talking about to save his people in the totality of their life. And all of us need a Mordecai, someone who knows us and calls us out to fulfill the calling that God wants us to do. And so we must step up with conviction. So in watershed moments, women leaders step up with conviction. And I draw your attention then to verse 15, which takes us to the willingness or not of Esther to step up with conviction. And you'll see when we go to verse 15, it says that she's starting to think about it. So we go from 14, where it's like, if you and your people that you will suffer, to Esther clearly thinking about it, thinking about this issue of stepping up with conviction. But what we don't have is as we look at the smooth flow from verse 14 to 15, we don't have a sense of the internal struggle that she engaged in to get to that point of conviction. But I promise you that there was a struggle. People say that preachers basically have like 4 or 5 sermons that we preach for a lifetime. And from Sunday to Sunday, we may pick a different text and we may change the title, but basically you come down to the same 4 or 5 sermons. So this is one of my sermons that I promise you, and you're going to hear a number of these sermons, some of my topics today. So the next time you hear that I'm preaching, you don't even have to come, because you say, I done heard all of that before. But this is one of my familiar themes. And it's the reminder that we are not foreign to the notion of struggle. Our people are not foreign to the notion of struggle. And I draw your attentions to the 10th chapter of Hebrews, and it's a letter that's written to the new Christians as they are getting ready to undergo another period of struggle, and they're starting to weaken. And the writer of Hebrews, and some people say it's Paul, but you know what? Some people say it's Priscilla. I'm going to go with Priscilla. And so Priscilla says to the people, it reminds the people that you've been through hard times before. You've been through situations where you've had your stuff confiscated. You've had to stand side by side with people who were persecuted. You know how difficult this struggle can be. But then Priscilla, if you will, reminds them that we don't come from people who give up in the face of adversity. That's just not our legacy. As women, we're not genetically programmed to give up in the midst of struggle, but we are of those who persevere and are saved. I can't think of a better example of that than Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman, again, is one of the sisters who calls me back to myself and reminds me of where I've come from. You know Harriet Tubman, the sister who because of her bravery freed hundreds of slaves over the times that she was moving forward as the Moses of her time. In her book entitled Harriet Tubman, The Road to Freedom, Catherine Clinton writes that Harriet wrestled with the decision to engage in the perilous work of freeing slaves. Harriet had great fears about her future course and confided, "The Lord told me to do this, and I said, 'Oh Lord, I can't. Don't ask. Take somebody else.'" But Tubman also reported that God spoke directly to her and said, "It's you I want, Harriet Tubman." And we know the story. Over the next 8 years, her decision to move forward would be tested. A price had been placed on her head, at one time as high as $12,000 and later even $40,000. And Harriet wasn't a tall woman, but she was smart and she was strong. And she also carried a long rifle. And she used them not only to intimidate the pro-slavery people they might meet, but also the slaves, the people who were enslaved, who might want to back out. She threatened anyone who seemed like they were about to leave. Of the famed hero, Moses, Frederick Douglass, another great hero in my tradition, said that I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than Harriet Tubman. And this is what Harriet demonstrates for us and what our sisters who've come before us have demonstrated as well. Women in leadership step up with conviction, and we make history in watershed moments. Christian women in leadership also step out on faith. So in verse 15, again, Esther says to Mordecai in verse 16, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my maids will also fast as you do." I want to point out a couple of things to note about this. Again, God has a plan to save his people in the midst of crisis. And this is what I've come to believe as well. This is one of my themes. This is one of the sermons that you will hear. I am firmly persuaded, and I am unapologetically evangelistic about that God has a plan and that women are key to executing that plan. And I will draw you to Exhibit A. And you know in Luke, and the story of Luke in chapter 8, verses 1-3, and it says that Jesus was traveling from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. And he says the 12 were with him. We know the 12 disciples. and also some people who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. And so Mary, who is called Mary Magdalene, thank you so much for someone flagging that my text is blocking your view. That's what a good girlfriend, that's what a Mordecai will do for you. And also some women who had been cured of evil spirits. And then it goes on to list our names. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chusa, the wife of the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support Jesus out of their own means. Now, I want to remind you that these are the same women who did, for the most part, the thing that the men did not do, that when it came for Jesus to go to the cross, when it came for Jesus to be buried in a borrowed tomb, that the ones who stuck with him were these same women who are identified in this chapter in Luke. And so that, I would say, is Exhibit A, that when God has a plan to redeem his people, that women are essential to the execution of that plan. I also draw you to Exhibit B. And as you've heard, I spent about 10 years, Liz Walker and I spent about 10 years working in Sudan. We were deeply engaged in the work of to stop the genocidal civil war between the North and the South. And then subsequently, we went on to do some critical work around girls' education. We did some important work around women's literacy, some important work around women's peace building efforts to address the conflict between the warring parties. And I will tell you that after doing that work in Sudan, the thing that most struck me in terms of what the ways that women work, that God uses to bring about significant change, is the capacity of women to collaborate, and oftentimes to collaborate across difference. So it's significant to me that when Esther was trying to figure out whether or not she could go forward with this, that she called together her girlfriends, and her girlfriends, I'm sure they talked her through, they pushed back, they reminded her of who she was and who she'd come from, and they prayed with her. So it was very much a collaborative effort. I will say one of the most poignant moments in my time in Sudan, and again, this was very early in the conflict, especially with Darfur. And because we had done so much work with peace building, we wanted to have a sense of what we could do to bring women together, and whether in fact they would be willing to work together across the tremendous divides. And we had gathered with the women, a group of 20 women, again, from different regions. And one of the things that had been, that was becoming more and more apparent was the extent to which rape was used as a weapon of war in the context of this conflict. And a big question was whether or not we should even talk about this. It was such a heinous thing. Should we even talk about this? And so the women had gathered and spent about an hour going back and forth about what this meant and whether they should talk about it, and whether I should talk about it, since it wasn't my experience. And at the end of an hour, one of the women from the southern part, and again, much of the rape was especially happening in the north, said, "I have not been raped, but if my sister has been raped, I have been raped. We will come together and we will build and we will create peace together." And so that was the example of the power of women to affect a plan, to work across difference, much like Sharon shared with us in her initial talk, to work across difference, to ensure that we all live in peace together. And then I share with you Exhibit 3. And this is the testimony of one of the men who was such a champion in the context of this war. And I heard him say this at a conference. He said, when he considered the ways that women have to work collaboratively, he said, I have long called for a revolution based on women. This revolution is the last best chance for making this globe hospitable to peace, to make this globe hospitable to compassion, hospitable to generosity and caring. And so when I say to you, again, unapologetically, I absolutely believe from what I have read in texts, what I have seen in our lives, that women are an essential key to the execution of God's plan to redeem the world. And that means that in terms of all of the stuff that we have seen in the past 18 months and throughout our lives and throughout the generations, God absolutely intends to use every woman on this call to make the difference, to stop the ism, to proclaim hope and peace and begin to rebuild the broken walls. He intends for all of us to make history. And then finally, God has called us to step forward with courage. Again, you have heard me talk so much about the work that Liz and I did in Sudan, and I'm going to start with that work, and what it looked like over there, but especially what it looks like now. We went to Sudan because Liz at the time, and you remember the remarkable Liz Walker, was one of Boston's most popular news anchor on Channel 4 WBZ, and she had been invited to do a story about the enslavement, especially of women, as a consequence of this war between the two factions, the northern and southern parts of Sudan. And when we got there, we did just awful stories and tales of the kinds of abuse that especially women endured in the context of this civil war. And we then, having heard the stories, had to make some decisions about the extent to which we would be engaged. And I went back first as kind of the person to help us think about that. And I had come through to the end of what had been a very hard day. Started the day, met a little boy whose face was deformed because he had been charged to keep the cattle of his slave owner and lost a cow, and the master chopped his nose off, and that was the beginning of the day. And then again, throughout the day, just hearing such horrible tales of abuse. And that night when it was time to sleep, I could not sleep and found myself wrestling with whether or not I could do this, whether Liz and I could do that work and take on that advocacy work. Because what Liz and I know that most people don't know is that we're actually quite shy, and that we're actually introverts, and that we actually have spent much of our lives trying to be pleasers, and have not been considered badly behaved women. And so for us to take on that role was going to require of us to dip into places that we did not feel confident going. But we talked about the reality that we, having acquired all of the skills, all of the relationships, all of the connections, much like Esther, had been raised up for such a time as that, and to appreciate that we were the descendants of people who knew this story. and that we had an opportunity to engage in a way for people who knew what our ancestors knew, to engage in a way that people had not engaged for our ancestors. And that very much undergirded the work that we did. And we spent 10 years doing lots of traveling, advocacy, the White House, arrests, protests, things that we never would have done, because we understood that we didn't come from people who gave up, but from people who persevered, not because they ever anticipated seeing the promise, but because they imagined that one day there would be a Gloria and there would be a Liz, and we would be the fulfillment of that promise. And then it was time to stop, and we did it for 10 years. But the thing that happened was that we found our voice as activists, as advocates, and we became badly behaved women. And so over the last 18 months, we have spoken out, we have protested, we have emailed, we have shown up in ways that we might not have done had we not gone to Sudan. I recall we have been going into prisons, because at some point we appreciated that while there are lots of things that were going on for people outside, there was very little attention to people who were in prisons. And so I had been working on the city's equity commission, and she had been working on the governor's equity commission around equitable distribution of vaccines. And so one of her advocacies was to ensure that when the vaccines were distributed, that they would go to prisoners who were not going to be able to quarantine or to isolate, and really were going to be very much at risk. When our first trip into the prison, and we arranged to go to one of the prisons here in Boston, our first trip to the prison, and there was the room of about 40 men, and we were talking about the vaccine and the pros and cons, and it was going to be coming, and encouraging them to get the vaccine. And one of the young brothers said to us, he says, well, I don't understand why I'm able to get the vaccine here out when I'm inside jail, and my family's not able to get the vaccine outside of jail. That doesn't, there must be something wrong with it, or you must be planning to use us as guinea pigs. And so we explained, no, we wanted to prioritize you and make sure, and the Commonwealth agreed to prioritize you because we care about you and we want you to live. And he said, well, I was just wondering, because I don't understand why they're prioritizing me now. The reason I'm here is because nobody ever prioritized me my whole life. And that's the kind of thing that fuels our stepping forward with courage, not because we're exceptional, any more exceptional than you, but because we understand that we have been raised up for such a time as this, in the midst of a crisis, to lead boldly. And so we're stepping up with conviction, and we're stepping out on faith, and we're stepping forward with courage, and we're making history. And I know that each one of you in your own way is equipped to do likewise. You may never go to Sudan, but I'm talking about your neighborhood. I'm talking about doing the kind of advocacy to ensure that people are treated justly, that they're treated equitably, doing the long, hard work to see people who are invisible, and to make sure that a system that wasn't designed for them gets fixed. And what we've learned is that not only serves the individuals who are the immediate recipients, but it becomes a win for all of us. And so I am so grateful for each of you, for you badly behaved women and all the ways that you're making change in all of the places that you're making it. You really are making history.
Thank you so much, Reverend Gloria. Oh my gosh, so much to ponder and so much to learn from. So I just want to remind everyone to be sure to put questions in the chat, things that I've already jotted down, at least 4, which I'm sure we won't get to them before. But I want to jump on one that just came in the chat first to kind of get us started on this Q&A section. So Reverend Gloria, you made a point of emphasizing that God's intended salvation for people is not just spiritual, but it's total, physical, emotional. So she says, I love that. And I've been thinking about that distinction quite a lot recently. Could you expand on what you mean by it? And then what inspired that emphasis, or how it might change our approach to how we do ministry or lead in ministry?
I think traditionally in churches that our emphasis is around getting people, again, in the church, getting them saved and getting them sanctified, and not addressing their tangible needs. And I am impressed that Jesus made that point. He was very clear about that point, that he came literally to bind up the brokenhearted. It wasn't simply about introducing himself and letting them experience the power of the Holy Spirit. He was holding people accountable around whether or not they addressed the needs of the incarcerated. Like this young man said, nobody prioritized me my whole life. That's why I'm here. And so so Christ was holding people accountable for addressing those needs. I mean, Christ came with the justice agenda. I really love the first, one of the most salient examples of this is when Mary in Luke, and you remember when Mary goes to visit, she realizes that she's pregnant, and she goes to visit Elizabeth. And this is again one of my favorite themes, is when she goes to visit Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, of course, is also pregnant and much older. But Elizabeth blesses the younger Mary, and the younger Mary, whose child is going to be so much greater, so much more well known than the older Elizabeth's child. And she says, and this, if you don't hear anything else, this is, and you can go get lunch now if you don't want to stay for the
No, don't listen to her. No.
So what Elizabeth says is, blessed is she who has believed that what the Lord has said to her about her will be accomplished. And then Mary goes into her whole song, and it's a song that not only says, wow, I'm just really blessed to carry the Christ child, but she goes through a whole conversation about the fact that this child is coming to ensure a sense of justice, to bring down the high and mighty who take advantage of the poor and the lowly. And so the sense is that Christ's arc really does go to justice, and we're accountable to ensure, to be the ones who execute the plan for that to go to justice. So yes, God does care about whether or not there are equitable incomes. God does care about whether or not people live in decent housing, whether or not children get decent education, whether or not people can breathe the air around them, whether God cares about what's happening to the climate. So it's not just about getting saved and the devotion with which I pray. It's the extent to which that salvation really touches the lives of people in very tangible ways. And we don't often hold each other accountable around it, but Christ does. Jesus does. That I will judge your discipleship on the basis of how well you meet the needs of others.
Wow. Yeah, that actually is a great segue to another question that is in the chat. Because you're talking about people, we needed people to hold us accountable. You talked about we all needed Mordecais. And so someone in the chat asked, how do we discern and know who our Mordecais are or is? And I think I was thinking about this earlier as well, of maybe you can actually share an example of a Mordecai for you, maybe somebody that you didn't recognize first as a Mordecai, but became an important voice like that.
Sure. Well, again, I would say that that's first of all, it's not a gendered role.
Right.
I have Mordecais in my life. Honestly, my husband in many ways has been that Mordecai, that he certainly knows me and can push me in ways that other people can't. And I hope for those of you who are partnered that your partner is a part of your Mordecai team. Certainly for me, overwhelmingly, my Mordecais are my women friends, and those come about in a number of ways. First of all, I think it's really important to pray for discernment. It's not a kind of thing, I don't know that I have not actually ever kind of gone to someone and said, will you be my Mordecai? It's the kind of relationship that evolves more naturally. I have Mordecais who are my prayer partnerships and people who I might not have initially kind of thought as a Mordecai, but in the context of the 40 days of prayer or the 100 days of prayer, we ended up becoming prayer partners. And that's an individual who, having walked with me now for the past 10 years as a prayer partner, knows me, knows my story, and can say to me, wait a minute. I remember 5 years ago, we prayed about, and what happened to that? So there really is a process of discernment. I've got colleagues, fellow pediatricians, fellow ministers who have done that for me. It requires you've got to be open and be transparent and tell the truth and be willing to be vulnerable and to learn from mistakes and not cave in, and take a hard look at yourself, and again, be clear about your calling and the extent to which you're walking in it. That's a whole other workshop there.
That's so great, man. We really do. So I want to go back to something you said in sort of the middle part of your talk, where you talked about that the capacity of women to collaborate across difference. And I know one of the things that we've wrestled with on our Women in Christian Leadership steering team is how do we talk about the different ways that women might lead without making it sound like it's a contest with men, or that, that if we say that women seem to have a greater capacity to collaborate, that somehow is saying that men can't do that. So I just would love to have you talk about that a little bit more and sort of what you see, because it sounded like it was born a little bit out of your experience of inviting women and then just seeing this emerge. So how did you discern that particular leadership ability of women that seems to be maybe a little more common among women, but and just talk a little bit more about that capacity and leadership and willingness to collaborate.
Sure. Well, I'd say again, one of the earliest kind of outside observations of this was especially in the work with Sudan. And then of course you see it there. And one of the reasons that we're here now is because at the point that God said, okay, you've done this, God pointed out that some of the same issues that we were advocating for over there were actually over here. So that's a whole other conversation about discerning where your Sudan is. But one of the earliest examples, we were interested in doing this peace building work. And men, what's been interesting to me, I didn't go to Sudan, I would say, as a feminist or a womanist. But I came back just by watching the way women work in the midst of, like everyday life-threatening crisis. And so I talked with one of my colleagues, a Sudanese man, and said, well, do you think that we could bring people together to across their differences and do some work of peace building? And he thought about it and he said, I can't see it. And then I sat for a while and I said, well, what about women? And he sat back, put his hands in his lap, and he looked at me with a smile and he said, I think you have something there. And that's what we began to see all over Sudan. And it's what you see literally around the world. I would say wherever I am in these advocacy spaces, where the people are actually doing the work, right? I'm not talking about who's on the board, who's heading up the initiative, but where the people who are doing the grunt work, they're predominantly women, and they're women from different places and spaces. And again, this is not 100%, and we can work each other's nerves, right? But there is a tendency, and this is what one woman said was the key to her peace. But she said, when I realized that the security of my child is a function of the security of your child, I understood that we needed to collaborate together. And when I understand that the extent to which my child is well educated and can make a difference is informed by the extent to which your child can get the education that they need that can make a difference, then I become invested not only in your child, but in my child's education. So part of it is starting to meet women where they are. And again, I'm not saying that men can't do this. Absolutely. I have seen men do that, but I have seen it in general go more smoothly when women are intentional about working collaboratively and holding each other accountable around that. And that's another kind of work, is how do we do this? So I'm not saying men can't do this. We know that that's not true. But I do think that that women's ways of working and thinking across difference without feeling threatened, especially facilitates that kind of collaboration. And I've seen that.
Wow, I love it. Hold on, I just want to back up here to one. So another question in the chat: how do you lead when you are the softer, humble, younger women's ministry leader and you're outnumbered by the bolder, older women? Can you reference a woman in the Bible as an example to help build and step forward with courage?
Yeah.
It's a great question because we want to foster intergenerational.
Yeah, yeah. So I want you to know that I am that I'm an old woman now, but once I was young, and so the person that you're seeing today is not the person that I have been most of my life. I have been the softer person. I have been the more reticent person. I have been the shyer person, and again, I still am. So like I said, people see Liz and me and hear us running our mouths and standing up and saying, "Oh no, I don't think so." But we know that we are the softer, humbler women in ministry. But it's having a sense of calling. So my hope is that when you're engaging with the older women, I am clearly at that point now where I am definitely trying to think in terms. So here's the thing. Let me use this metaphor, and I hope that. And so the conversation here is for the older women who are in ministry, and that part of our responsibility is to bring aside younger women. And I think of it this way. I rather like the metaphor that I've heard ascribed to Gloria, what's her name? Gloria Steinem. and when we often think about passing the torch, and part of the problem is if you're an older woman, you think you still got stuff going on. And so the idea of passing the torch isn't, I mean, you're not ready to pass the torch because so much of our identity is in the fact that we got this torch. And so the metaphor that I challenge older women to think about is not so much passing the torch, because we need all hands on deck all the way to the end, but lighting torches. And so lighting the torches of younger women all along the way. And so that I'm carrying my torch and you're carrying your torch. So that, because we need all the torches that we can get. And then the other kind of thing that I'm thinking about in terms of this whole thing of torches is that I'm going to carry my hand with one torch, but I'm going to use my other hand to fan the flames of my sister so that her torch can continue to grow brighter and stronger, and that we are all moving forward with the torches. So the question that I asked myself last week is, and I think this is what you're asking to some extent in terms of the collaborative earth, who is fanning my flames? And I have specific, I mean, I can tell you Cecilia Williams Bryant is fanning my flame. Some of the women who are on here now, I see you, Belinda. I see you, Andrea. I see you, Raynell. I see you, Cynthia. I see you, Dana. These are the women who, with my torch, have fanned my flame over the decades. And there are other women who I understand that it's my responsibility to constantly fan their flames and to help them imagine, to do for them what was done, to help me begin to imagine the possibility that even in the midst of my quiet voice, that I have something to say on this subject. So much of my conversation would be directed to the older women, right? So we're not asking you to go away. They're not asking us to go away. They're just asking us to light the torch and fan the flame.
So we have time for, I think, one more question before we start moving into small groups. And someone asked to give maybe one specific example of what it meant to you to just step up with conviction. You know, maybe talk a little bit more about how that conviction that was in you got expressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And again, I go back to Sudan because the woman who went to Sudan is not, that is me, but that was just the place where this other persona emerged, and it was really, really scary because again, I have lived most of my life inside that box. I was the well-behaved girl. I always colored inside the lines. And so the idea of speaking about an injustice meant that I was going to subject myself to criticism. And that's just not me. But for me, it was remembering again about who I am and who I am in Christ, and this word doesn't speak to people who won't say nothing or do nothing. That God didn't save you to be quiet. So it was that, and again, it was remembering where I've come from, and that's, for me, that's as a woman of African descent, and it is a woman, and so for me, my heroes are women who endured anyhow. And so it was never about me. So the speaking up was not about me. It was about, I have something to say. And it's not even the whole thing of, I want to be the voice for the voiceless women. Women have a strong voice. They don't need anybody to be the voice for them.
Amen.
Just give them the mic. They know what to say. Just amplify their voices, and women can tell you what it is they need, and they can make it happen. And they're making it happen all around the world, and they made it happen, and that's why we're here. So it meant, again, I organized my first protest. I just never did anything like that because I never protested, because I was a nice girl. I was well behaved. But I remember the first protest that I organized, and the the rallies and all of that. And then and again, that particular work took me to the White House, first to George Bush, and then to Barack Obama. And I never thought, but that happened because somebody had a dream. And I'll let me just share this last thing, and then we can go into Bruce. But I just talking about Barack Obama, I never thought I would be at a White House, that the next president would be a Black man. But one of the things that fuels me is that on the night of the election, when and we were waiting for the election results, and we gathered a small group at our church in one of the rooms and watched the television. And one of the people who was with us was Ray's mom, who had Alzheimer's and lived with us her last 10 years. And she had gotten to the place where she certainly knew her name. She didn't even really, honestly, she didn't know my name, but she knew I had something to do with her son. And we cared for her. And on the night of the elections, we gathered for the election party. And as you remember, the result came in really relatively early. And of course, we all shouted, and I said to Mom, we were looking at the screen, and Barack Obama's picture came, and I said, Mom, that Black man, he's the president. And she said, oh yeah? And she got a big smile. And of course, we all linked arms and began to sing, "We Shall Overcome." And the woman who couldn't rightly remember my name, or really kind of figure out quite where she was, pulled up the words to that song, oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And so I'm here because they were there. And all of us are women. Somebody dreamed possibilities for us. So yeah, I come out of myself, and I'm faking, and sometimes you just gotta fake it until you make it. I come off as being, but really, you all know for real that there's a shrinking violet in there somehow. So I'm just acting, but you go forward. Your knees can be knocking, your voice can be quivering, just go forward anyhow. And the more you do it, the better you'll be able to fake them out, and you'll be okay. So that's where that comes from. You have everything you need to do the thing that God has called you to do. And again, I just based on what I know, right? Not just on what I think, or what I wish. Based on what I know, God calls women. Again, he calls men too. I'm not saying he don't call, just because you say he calls women doesn't mean he don't call nobody else. I'm just saying that I know that God calls women and to execute the plan. And when women execute, again, I'm just saying my experience, it's based on my data, that when women make progress, everybody makes progress. The children make progress, the men make progress, everybody makes progress. When we figure out what we need to do to take care of the least of these, we all maximize our potential and we all win.